How will we address the climate crisis? Climate One with Greg Dalton brings together advocates, influencers, and policymakers in empowering conversations that connect all aspects of the climate emergency, the individual and the systemic, the scary and the exciting, to help you understand the most critical issue of our time. Because addressing the climate crisis begins by talking about it.
Tom Steyer rose to public prominence as the billionaire investor and organizer who ran for president in 2020 on a climate-first platform. While he didn't secure the Democratic nomination, his dedication to supporting and advancing climate solutions has remained steadfast. Steyer believes that with the existential threat of climate change comes a great opportunity for innovation, global leadership, and economic growth. But can capitalism, the system that helped create the climate crisis, be the system that fixes it? Tom Steyer, today on Climate One.
In 2012, you left the successful hedge fund that you founded to focus exclusively on climate. What motivated that decision?
I was working in the Exxon building to tell the state of Alaska what to do with the excess tax revenues coming off the North Slope. And they wanted me to come up with development projects. And what I said was, save the money for when the oil runs out. Put it in the bank. And they ended up, at the end of the summer, I made my presentation. I thought the guy who had hired me was going to literally punch me in the face. He said, I hired you to do development, and you're saying put it in the bank. That's the exact opposite of what we want to do. But they ended up doing the permanent fund. They were smarter than me because they did save the money, but then they paid a dividend to everybody. But I had a great summer. I loved the woods. It was incredible. 2006, I took my family up there to see what I'd seen so they could see what North America looked like. And they could see all the birds, and they could see the fish, and they could see the mammals, and they could see the woods. And they could see Denali. And it was all melting. And so we all came back to San Francisco and said, oh my God, this is real. Maybe we can make a contribution. Let's figure out why we're not dealing with it. And then we started, all of us started trying to figure out what we could do about it.
Yeah, I went to the Arctic in 2007 and had a life-changing epiphany and saw the melting and came back.
It was incredible.
Right. Fertile time. And also Al Gore's first film came out around that time, so that may have influenced both of us. What are the biggest personal changes you've made since you centered your life on climate?
I'd spent 27 years starting a business which had started, in a room with no windows, and which became a big investment business. And I was also on the investment committee and a partner in another big investment business for 27 years, which also had started with nothing. And what changed? I wanted to change because I could afford to change, but I also wanted to change because I want a meaningful life.
And you built some of that wealth in fossil fuels, which you've now...
We invested, my God, until I really realized what was going on, we invested in everything, and fossil fuels are the biggest business in the world. What are the biggest changes? The biggest changes is who I hang out with. I went back, I'll tell this one story, which is not in the book. I went back a year ago, say, to meet with 15 people who either ran the big banks in the United States or big private equity firms, with Jennifer Granholm, who's the Secretary of Energy, and a couple other people in the energy department, to talk about what Wall Street could do to finance a clean energy transition. That was what it was about. And what I realized was, my God, I am so different from these people, even though some of them have been my friends for 40 years. They are doing, I talked to a very good friend of mine, who we've been friends literally for more than 40 years. And I said, do you know this stuff about climate? He was at the meeting, he runs a big firm. He goes, no. I said, do you know what 1.5C means? He goes, no. The most basic stuff about climate, he was like, never heard of it. They just asked me to come to this, so I'm here. And I said, well, you're a good person. How about if I sit down with you and I talk to you about what I think is going on, and you think about whether your firm should be doing something different and whether you should be doing something different with your life.
And these are highly intelligent people who study macro trends and everything else, and they don't know 1.5 degrees of warming.
But here's what they do know. They can make a $12 billion loan for a liquid natural gas facility in South Texas or Louisiana and make a very good rate of return, secure rate of return on it. That's what they know.
And that's all that matters is the rate of return.
We had a conversation at that dinner where I was like, you got to be kidding me if you think that's an okay thing to do. And they're looking at me like, who invited this guy to a meeting of bankers?
So you've evolved, and they haven't quite, they're still working within this system that it's all about earnings per share, bottom line. And, your book makes the case that capitalism is the most effective mechanism for driving large-scale climate progress. Yet many economists say that climate change is caused by a failure of markets to price pollution because polluters don't pay in our system. We use the atmosphere as an unpriced sewer. So,
Which is true.
Do you agree that climate is a result of market failures?
Absolutely. So let's just take a step back and think about what capitalism does and what it doesn't do. Capitalism is a very, very effective way to incent things to get done well and fast and scale. But the other thing that's true is it is not a moral system. It is an effective system. The rules, there's no such thing as a free market. So people talk about it as if God set down these rules of the free market. That does not exist. Human beings set the rules. The first markets, where the market's going to be, where you get to put your stall, when the market opens, all set by humans. The New York Stock Exchange closes at 4 p.m. Not set by God, by the way. So in that system, people obey the rules of that system pretty much. And one of the rules of the system was basically, we're going to get the cheapest, best energy. And if you look at human, lifestyle standards of living, they're extremely highly correlated with energy usage. So since 1800, much more energy usage per person, very highly correlated with fossil fuels, and it's absolutely connected to people's lifestyle changes and increased standards of living. The problem was, it turned out that we were polluting in a way that nobody knew. No one set out to dig oil and gas so they could heat up the world and ruin it. But people got very used to not paying for their pollution, and they love making the money. And so once it's established, to say to people, okay, now we're going to charge you for your pollution is really hard because they're, biggest industry in the world making trillions of dollars, very hard to push that over. And so capitalism works, but it works according to the rules that are set up. And if those rules say you can hire a 14-year-old and pay him a quarter for 12 hours worth of work, they'll do it because they did it in this country. So the rules really matter. And the rules here had a big flaw.
And so how do we change the rules? If we need to, price on carbon, we've heard about that. Most economists would say price on carbon is the solution. Hasn't happened. It's gradually happening around the world. So how do we change the rules so that capitalism doesn't destroy us?
So I'd say there's a couple of things going on. And let me give a little advertisement for something I've got nothing to do with. There's a computer program at MIT, and you get to put in all the things you want to change, policy things, and it shows what happens to the climate, in terms of how much impact does it have in terms of reducing emissions and changing the trajectory of climate change. And the thing that's the most powerful is a price on carbon. It's kind of, depending on what you put in, it's really, really effective, just so you know. But that is on a computer program at MIT. In the real world, in the United States of America, it's very hard to put in new taxes. And so what the IRA, which is the Biden administration's huge, successful, biggest ever climate bill, is basically a carbon tax on its head. Instead of charging people for polluting, they're paying people who produce the same thing without polluting. So it's a subsidy instead of a tax.
A carrot, not a stick.
And that's how it's designed. Basically what they're saying is, if politics is the art of the possible, that's what we could do. And it's a huge bill, and it's designed to both speed up deployment of existing technologies and create new technologies.
So you think that capitalism can do things quickly. We need to move quickly on climate. Capitalism is a good thing. It has some flaws that need to be fixed. AI is exploding. The energy use of AI is jaw-dropping and truly alarming. Microsoft used to, was building a $100 billion data center. And there's some indication that Microsoft and even Google are easing off of their climate commitments because AI is juicing their profits and their stock so much. So talk to us about AI as a climate problem, because it's not getting discussed very much. And could this get ahead of, by running in this market that you say is not moral, the incentives for these companies to do things that are good for themselves and bad for the planet is pretty strong.
Yes, it is. So if you think about it, we've had pretty flat electricity, demand in the country for a long time. And AI is supposed to basically increase it by about 20%, which is a revolution. And the argument is partly that we're going to build more fossil fuel electricity capacity because we can do it, because we know we can do it and we know we can finance it and we know what it costs. And the other part is that we're not going to retire the fossil fuel existing plants that we were otherwise going to retire in place of renewables. So it's both. It's new stuff and also not retire old stuff. So we should talk a little bit about what these different things cost and what the cost means. So just so you know, solar and wind are much cheaper than natural gas and coal in terms of electricity, much. And they'll go down another 80%, and there's no comparison right now. They're not close, and that disparity will only widen over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 50 years. It's also true that people always love to talk about this. The sun doesn't always shine. The wind doesn't always blow. And one of the things about these data centers and AI demand is they need it 24/7, 365, absolutely for sure. So that means you can't, if the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow and you have a Texas-style meltdown, that is really bad. So they really can't go there.
What are some areas that you're spending most of your time now looking at emerging technologies that can have climate benefits? Other than the ones we've talked about, there's superconductors for transmission.
We're doing that.
Yeah.
Look, I'll give you just 3. There's 1 million smart people in this country and around the world working on this. That's one of the reasons that I say we're going to win cheaper, faster, better, is because we have a whole bunch of really, really talented young people working on this who are scientists and engineers and financiers and every kind of problem solver that you can think of, there are people doing this. So one of the things that's true is people are very worried about cattle. And people are very worried about the methane from cattle, that it's going to destroy the world and it's terrible and we shouldn't eat meat and we shouldn't raise cattle. So just so you know, the methane from a cow actually comes from a parasite in the cow's gut, not from the cow. And so people have developed an enzyme that kills the parasite.
Is this feeding them seaweed? Is that the thing? Or
No,
something else?
No, seaweed is different, and we could go through what I think about that. But just so you know, it's just a problem that we can solve. And it costs 6 cents a day. The second one, which is kind of gets to my point, 8% of emissions worldwide are concrete and cement. And it's considered one of the hard to abate sectors. And, people are building all over the world and they have huge cement and concrete plants all over the world, and it's kind of par for the course. But if you do current sensors, software, and AI to change the soup that is concrete and cement, you can come up with something that is just as strong, much cheaper, and has half the emissions. A large part of what we have to figure out is, how do we do this in the footprint and the context that we live in now? Because we're not going to tear down every building in America and rebuild it in a energy efficient or emissions neutral way. That's not going to happen. So the question is, how do we do it given where we are now, given what we have now, given the rights of ways and the rules we have now? This is the 21st century. We have a 21st century problem. The 21st century is about information. Our ability to measure emissions, our ability to measure sequestration, our ability to give managers and people measurement, transparency, accountability, those measurement systems don't exist. That's the way we will actually, from a strategic standpoint, be able to solve this, is put the capability into the hands of managers, of governments, of neighbors, so that everybody knows what's going on, and then ask people to solve it. And I'll give you an example. One of the, I think they're called Magnificent Seven companies. So I'm friends with some of the people there. And the person who was in charge of this, they did their scope 3, their supply chain emissions measurements. And they told me we had no idea where the emissions were coming from. We thought we knew. We didn't understand a big part of it. And we immediately had 3 strategies to figure out how can we reduce these without increasing costs. That is the biggest thing we're going to do in my mind. The day we have good measurement systems across the board, the day that they're transparent so managers and people from outside the companies can see them, that day we win.
So measurement, cleaner cows, cleaner cement.
Cows are not clean. I just want to tell you.
Right, there's a lot of, you own a cattle ranch, so you would know. So how much of this is going to require, hearing all this sounds a little bit like the techno-optimist theory of change. Technology can save us. And when I hear that, I get a little concerned that, that means we can leave the rest of things in place. That means I don't need to change a lot myself. We could change the rules of capitalism a little bit, but I can relax because you know what? Some cool tech's going to come along in a few years, and it's going to be okay.
I would not say that, and I think that's a great question. Look, I think this is an all of society response that we need. I think this is changing very deeply the way we not just generate and use electricity, but the way we do all the huge systems in our country and around the world. And I think that it's not that we have the capability to solve this. No question in my mind, and that is the technology. But that doesn't mean we've gotten it done. And the analogy that I use in my book is to World War II. We had the technology to win World War II before we got into World War II. The problem was we weren't building any of the ships, we weren't building any of the planes, we weren't building any of the tanks. We were living our lives. And I think that the United States decided we have to do this, and that meant from 1941 to 1945, we built no passenger cars. Zero passenger cars, because we decided as a people and as a government and as businesses that that's what we were going to do because it was that important.
Right, and there are some people who would say that we know everything we need to do. We just need to do what we did in World War II, which is repeat, deploy, and scale the things we know how to build. We don't need new widgets that Tom Steyer invests in or that that comes out. If we just deploy what we already know how to do,
we can do it.
We have the tools.
Okay, well, let me just to continue and maybe torture the World War II analogy. I think we invented a whole bunch of stuff during World War II. There is a whole bunch of things that we came up with between 1941 and 1945 in the war effort that changed so much stuff.
So it's both and. We need.
Of course it is. Yeah. Look, the real question is, are we, can we decide together this is worth doing? If we do, we can do it. This is not a part of society solution. This is people from all over the country, people of both political parties, people who disagree on a lot of things and may decide to do this for completely different reasons. If we want all of society, we have to have all of society figuring out what to do in leadership positions, doing things in ways that might be different, bringing their own experience and knowledge and values to it. And so when I look at this, it's not going to be 15 people from Wall Street. It's not going to be 15 people from Harvard. It's not going to be 15 people from the New York Times. Thank God. It's going to be people from around the country who care about the same things, who are decent people and realize, okay, this is a challenge. It's also a huge opportunity for us. This is a gigantic opportunity for all of us. Let's go for this and let's put our spin on it. I think that people generally posit that you change your mind and you change your behavior. Whereas I think in this case, and in most cases, you change your behavior and then you change your mind. The people who work in enhanced geothermal are thrilled to work in enhanced geothermal, and they're basically oil field workers. It's a change. Their behavior is changing the way they see things. They don't want to destroy the planet. They want a job. And if people get into this and participate in it, I think that's the best way to change people's attitudes about what we're really trying to do.
But there's a school of thought which is individual change is insufficient. paper straws and recycling and your electric car and my electric car is not enough. We need to change systems. Most of us don't think in systems. How do we act as individuals and then try to drive systemic change? Because individual action is necessary and insufficient.
Yes,
we need to change
true.
capitalism. We need to change all these systems around us. And so this is the conundrum of individualism, right?
So yes, and here's what I would say, and I don't know if this is going to be convincing, but this is something I say in the book. In World War II, people had victory gardens, and they basically grew food in their backyards or wherever they could because they wanted to have more food for the troops. And so one of the things that people did was to change their lives in ways, but we did not win World War II because of victory gardens. But we did change people's attitudes, and we did change, that was something where people were making a commitment that was visible and was saying to other people, this is what I care about, I'm all in on this. So from my standpoint, yeah, I do drive an electric car. Do I think that's going to save the world? No, I don't. But I feel as if, it's sort of like voting. Is my vote going to change the presidential election, or who's going to win the Congress seat in San Francisco, or who's anything else? No, I don't think so. But we all have to contribute, and I always vote because we all have to contribute, and I feel exactly the same way about this. Is like, we should all be thinking about it. We should be feeling responsible for it, for our own sake, for our family's sake, but also for everybody else's sake. We have responsibilities across society. That's a big part of being in a democracy. That's who we are. That's the United States of America. We recognize that. That's the American experiment.
And that democracy is being exercised right now. The last time you and I sat here on this stage, you were running for president, and Democratic candidates were trying to outdo themselves with $1 trillion climate plan and $5 trillion climate plans. And there was a lot of race to the top among Democrats on climate. We barely heard climate at the Democratic National Convention. Kamala Harris doesn't talk about it very much. A lot of green groups have endorsed her, the Green New Deal Coalition and other groups. So what's your take? She endorsed the Green New Deal. She's changed her position on fracking, looking at Pennsylvania. So what's your take on Kamala's climate position and the amount of the prevalence of climate in this campaign, which is pretty low?
So I think you have to take a step back. Kamala's from California. She has a long history of behavior around climate and energy. She's been a climate leader. She was as AG. She's part of an administration that's been by far the most climate-aware administration in American history. If you're looking at this campaign, not to be rude, but it doesn't seem like it's kind of driven mostly by policy at the moment. And so,
maybe a good thing, because Democrats often preach policy, and that's not where people are.
Exactly. And so my point is, here's somebody who has a long history of being a positive climate leader, who has stood up on this issue for decades, and is now running a campaign that is mostly about a very stark difference about whether we're looking to create a new future or whether we're trying to get back to our past. And I think that's the campaign that we're seeing. And do I believe that an energy transition and a climate awareness are a critical part of creating a new future? Of course I do. That's what I spend all my time on. Is there any question in my mind whatsoever who is the candidate who represents me? None. I'm 100% confident that there's a clear choice here. There's a choice that I believe in, and there's a choice where I feel like it's absolutely contrary to the things that I think data, science, and common sense and morality all point to.
You're in favor of the IRA, which is building, supporting financially battery plants, infrastructure in the United States. A lot of this, by the way, is going into red states, and there's a real fissure in the Republican Party about whether if they get in power, they're going to repeal the IRA, et cetera. But we do have a problem that a lot of the EVs tend to be in blue areas of the country, and EVs are now part of the culture wars. EVs tend to sell in upper income and blue parts of the country. So how concerned are you about, clean energy getting pulled into the culture wars and solar is not cool in certain parts of the country? Because I'm not that.
So here's what I'd say. People talk a lot. People love to run their mouths. But the book is called Cheaper, Faster, Better. So let's talk for 1 second about EVs and electricity. Renewable is much cheaper. In 2023, so last year, for the last year, we have statistics for a whole year, 86% of new electricity generation globally was renewable. That was not because anyone was being nice. Don't expect anyone to be nice. It's cheaper. They bought it because it's cheaper. Texas has tripled its solar capabilities in the last 3 years. Not because they love solar, because they're cheap. They're going to add another 35% this year. People talk in the United States about the slowdown in EV growth. Still growing faster than the car market by a lot, but not as fast as before. But let's talk about the United States as a car market. We are weird. Very weird. People here drive 5,000-pound cars to the store to buy diapers. No one else in the world does that. Plus, we're a big country and people drive a long way, which means that we have to be able to go a long way on a charge or we feel it's unfair that we have to fill up. In China, which by the way is the biggest car market in the world, over 50% of the cars sold in China in July were EVs. They're going to 80%. Fast. And I don't know how many of you guys drive an electric car, but let me say this. Of my friends who definitely are not climate aware, they think electric cars have better pickup. They think they handle better. They think they're more fun to drive. You know, and I feel that way, like on a nice sunny day with a good tape deck, you can have a great time in a car. EVs are better cars. And so when we look at this, cheaper, faster, better, do I think if batteries go down 80% again this decade, which they will, what is an EV? It's a battery with a car with a chassis around it. That's all it is. If the battery goes down 80% and it gets a bigger range, aren't people going to buy? Not because it's good, not because someone told them. Are some people still going to use their turntables? Yes. But are most of us going to go Spotify? Yes. And this is Spotify.
Let's give a big round of applause to Tom Steyer for joining us here this evening at Climate One.